Good morning, Humanity Church. How you doing? Awesome. Hey, my name's Nathan. I'm our lead pastor here at Humanity Church. So excited to have you. Hey, if this is your first time, we want to say you're welcome here. You belong. This is a space for you. We're just so honored that you would join us this morning and be in our presence. We're so excited that you would spend some Sundays time with us. Hey, this last week, 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, Ray Adamiak, texted me and said, hey, I have a friend, Austin, who's going to be in town, and would it be okay if he came and shared his story? Now, if you know Humanity Church, we don't really have a lot of outside people that we don't know come speak, and so my instant reaction was no. And I was about to text no, and then he texted me with a link to a YouTube video. And I was like, well, let me watch the YouTube video. And I got to listen to Austin Carlisle's story, a little bit of it on there, and I thought, this guy feels like he's a part of our community, and his message resonated so much with who we are and what we're about. And so I am excited to have him share some of his story with you this morning. I know some of you are here because you know him from his music and from some of the things he's done in the past, and my joy is that you're going to get to experience a part of maybe another aspect of who he is and his story this morning. So whether you're someone who is already connected to Jesus, or you're like exploring that, or maybe you're like, hey, that's not for me, this morning I'm going to ask you just to listen to the incredible journey of Austin. So would you guys invite him up, or welcome him up here as he comes on up?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. You'll have to excuse if I keep going to my water. I just had a mouth surgery. So my name is Austin. I'm 33 despite my appearance. I'm going to steal a quote that this young lady used just before I was up here. She said, I wanted to be known, and I desired to be known, but I had a fear of being rejected by people once I was known by them. And that resonated with me much more than I could put into words in these few minutes. Who in here loves pizza? Okay. Now, who in here loves their mom? If you had to pick one or the other, which would it be? Pizza with mom. That's not fair. So I loved the worship today more because they were not pointing at themselves, but they were pointing towards who they were worshiping. And if you're new to church, new to something like this, you might, just to be honest, frankly, with you churchgoers, it's corny, it's cheesy. What are they talking about? This is lame. Why are people raising their hands? What are they doing? But they're worshiping. We're worshiping because the words, it's not because the band is amazing, which they were, the drummer we're hiring. But it's because they're pointing towards God, they're pointing towards Jesus and what our story and what Jesus has done for our lives. And for us that have stepped into that relationship with Jesus, those words mean more than any music could ever describe. We could sing it with no music and still do the same thing. And that's because of that loving relationship that we have with Jesus. Not that loving churchiship or that loving religious sideship we have with Jesus. It's that loving relationship we have with him. And that kind of flipped everything today that I wanted to speak about. So I love pizza as well. Been on fluid diet for about 20 days. But I also love my mom. I was raised in a Christian home, went to church every Sunday, looked like this, even the pews. Vacation Bible school, my parents were in church, worked in the church. And I love my mom. I was a mama's boy for sure. My dad was the one that spanked me. My mom was the one that would, take my green beans off the table when I wouldn't eat them. So My parents ended up getting a divorce when I was about 14, 15 years old for some crazy reasons. And when I was 17 years old, my mom passed away suddenly within 2 hours, boom. And I ran out of the hospital. I was all alone. My grandma was there. She had came in, ran out of the hospital. And I went from loving God, loving Jesus, to hating God. I literally cursed God. I used curse words that I haven't used for the first time in my life towards God. And so for the next 10, 11 years, I did everything in my power to get God to hate me as much as I hated him. And in doing all these things to get him to hate me, it involved doing things that I loved. I loved music, so I started going to shows. I loved going to shows, and I also loved to sing, so I started a band. I loved being in a band, so I kept being in a band. I loved the success, so I kept being successful. I loved having power control over 100,000 Germans and making them split an entire arena and then crush themselves on the count of 3. Or a circle pit around a soundboard. Or everybody take me and crowd surf me out the back door to the bus. I loved that. I loved drinking. I loved the drugs. I loved the women. I loved the identity, the self-identity. I loved the empowerment that I felt because I could never get a girlfriend in high school and middle school. No girls ever. He has braces, freckles, he's weird looking, he's tall, he's skinny. I was like this tall. And now all these women, and I loved them. I loved that attention. I even found a few that I loved for 2 months at a time. I loved my famous friends. I loved the club. My mom passed away from something called Marfan syndrome, which is a genetic connective tissue disorder. And basically, it makes all the tissues in your body stretch and tear and break more easily than anyone else. It's very rare. She had an aortic aneurysm, and her heart ruptured. Her aorta ruptured, and that's why she bled out in 2 hours. I found out that that's what I had. I hated that I had that. But I also loved that it kept me away from things like cocaine and methamphetamines because I would have done them if it wasn't for the heart condition. But I found out that I had this. So I had hip surgery, rib surgery, ear surgery twice, foot surgery, leg surgery, back surgery. Who in here's had an epidural, you ladies? I've had probably 20 of them. Just a tour, trigger point injections, so on and so on. That was one of the parts where the drugs came in. Mostly marijuana, and then the rest were prescription drugs. And as the band grew and that success grew, I also had open heart surgery. Forgot that little one. They cracked me open, put in a fake valve, put me back together. My surgeon to this day is still proud that they got my tattoo back together. There's only been about 500 of the same surgeries that I've got. And my specialist has done over 400 of them. He's like a John Wayne, 80-year-old cowboy, like total, he's awesome. So I love him as well. That whole time I was in the band, I loved the fans. Darla, Jacob. I've known 2 of these guys for 11 years? I love the fans. I love connecting with the fans. I love the lyrics. I wrote about self-harm, suicide, things I had been through, things I had tried. I wrote about depression, addiction. I wrote about divorce, death, feeling like every day you walk around, you want to just drive the car into the road, or you just want to, I wrote about it all. And that brought me a connection. And I loved that. So I love them. Darla, Jacob, now Max, you're extra. I love you too. That whole time, especially after growing up in church, I knew I had a gap in my heart that I was filling because I wanted to suppress God, because I hated God, and I wanted to fill that little cross-shaped hole in my heart with all these temporary things that I loved. I called my dad one night. He said, "Where is God in your life?" I had no answer. So I searched for him. I called out to him. During our last album, I put a pencil down and I gave my life, not just Sunday school, walking up to the front. I don't want to go to hell. Many 7 and 11-year-olds do that, not saying that can be it. But I was born again and stepped into the kingdom of heaven and kingdom living, was born again and had a new heart when I put that pen down. It was at that point that I knew that I loved God. I had a girlfriend at the time of 2.5 years I wanted to marry. I loved her. But I said, I want to put God above you. She went psycho. That was done. God took me out of the band 3 months later due to my health. Took me to the jungle. And he led me on this crazy journey that led me to a wife with a brain tumor. And 2 daughters. And the love I have for my wife is different than my love for pizza. The love I have for my 5-year-old is different than the love I have for my mom. The love I have when my newborn smiles at me in the morning is different than any kind of love of the smiles of seeing Jacob and Darla or doing this. But none of them and none of that surpasses the love that I have received and the love that overflows that I have from God. So I just wanted to, the pastor gave me that opportunity to speak, and he said, we never let anyone speak. So I said, I'm going to go up there and drop it like it's hot. But the world offers this. Satan offers this. And God offers this. And John 10:10 says, the thief, which is Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he does that all with things that you love. But I have come, Jesus, to give you life and life more abundant. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, man. So good, so good. Man, I think we made a good decision, right? Oh, man. Thank you, Austin. That's so good. And ironically, he took like half my message, and we haven't even talked about it, so it's all good. We can probably just go home and have pizza now. So it's all good. Well, hey, we are at the very last week of a series that we've been calling Enhanced, that's going through a book that I wrote last year and put it out in February, and then the pandemic hit and we didn't touch it. And so we are going to jump right into that. And really, this is a journey that we've been going on for the last few weeks. If you've missed the last couple weeks, you can check out the podcast or our YouTube channel. But we've been looking at this journey of faith and what it looks like to become a person that is defined by our epicness and by the life that we're called to live, rather than the smallness that we oftentimes find ourselves in. And this book is based on this passage in the scriptures by this guy by the name of Peter, who wrote this. He says this. He says, his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who has called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in this world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins. So we've really been looking at what it looks like to live a life that is moving towards corruption and defined by corruption, and into this life that is defined by your divine nature, and how you step into the fullness of the life that you were designed to live. Now, in Christianity, we have all these cheesy phrases that don't actually jive with anything that Jesus said. And we use them on a regular basis. Even in some of our worship songs that we sing, when things are said like this, I cringe a little bit inside. Like one of those is that, like when we talk to God, we say, "You're all I need." That's actually not true, because just hold your breath and just say, "I don't need air," right? You probably need that. Go a couple days without food, you'll probably find that you need food. In fact, one of the greatest punishments that we have on the planet is solitary confinement, so you actually need other people. And so we can say, "All I need is you," but that's not actually categorically true. We have cheesy phrases like, "Let go and let God," or like, "Jesus, take the wheel, thank you, Carrie Underwood," right? I dare anyone to do that, right? Just take a drive down the street and just, "Jesus, take the wheel. You got it. I'm just going to press the gas. You do," right? You wouldn't do that with your car. You should not do that with your life, I promise you. Now, there's a difference between saying, "Hey, like, tell me where I need to go, and I will grab hold of the wheel and hold on to this for the life of me because this is where I'm supposed to go." But the other phrase that I think is just incorrect is, "All you need is faith." And that's not what the scriptures tell us, and it's actually not how we are to live our lives. We are to start with a life of faith, that if you're going to live the life that you were designed to live, to step into the fullness, to live out the dreams that God has placed in you, it starts with faith. But we have to actually enhance our faith from there. You need to upgrade from that space. And the great thing about this passage is that we have this formula, if you will, that we add to our faith goodness, and goodness knowledge, and knowledge self-control, and perseverance, and godliness, and mutual affection, and love in this. So we've been in this conversation of what it looks like to supplement our faith. And it starts with adding goodness to our faith, meaning that we engage faith from this perspective that God is always up to something good, that he's working things together for goodness. And when you believe that God is good, if you're willing just to go crazy for a minute and actually believe that God might be on your side, I don't care where you're at or where you're from, that God is actually for you, it allows you to move further faster. Because here's the thing, you're never going to put your faith in something that you don't think is good. If you're like, "Hey, this thing is rickety and it's janky and I don't know, I'm not going to put my faith in this," you're never going to move forward with that in your life. But God is working all things together. Now, let me just say this. It doesn't mean all things are good. I think sometimes people who call themselves followers of Jesus have this weird rose-colored glasses view of the world. And it's not that all things are good. It's that God is working things together for good. And so we see the world through that space. And it shifts how we engage our faith. It takes it from like this Disney version of like a dream is a wish your heart makes to having some traction to it. It transforms this reality that we live in. And then we add to our goodness knowledge so that when your feelings come up and you're like, "I don't know if this is good," you can fall back on what you know to be true. How many times is your life led by the phrase, "I feel like"? Now, that's not a problem. It's just if you're going to base your life on feelings, you're going to constantly be led around by your feelings. And what we do know about our feelings is they change by the moment. Sometimes they change based on what you had for lunch that day. And so if that's what you're basing your life on, you're constantly going to be in flux and change, and you're going to find yourself wondering, how do I move forward? So we add knowledge to our goodness. And then he says, once we have knowledge, we add self-control to that. If knowledge is power, according to Schoolhouse Rock, then self-control actually takes that and hones it so that we can move that responsibility forward, to control our impulses, to harness our life so that we take all of the power that lives in us and we move it towards goodness. It just needs to be harnessed so that you can move into the future that you were called into. Anyone in here like worry fanatics, like you're addicted to worry? Yeah. See, this actually takes all that worry and it harnesses it towards something that's meaningful, self-control. And then it says once we've got self-control down, then we need to add perseverance to our self-control, because here's the thing. Anyone can have self-control for a moment. Anyone can go on a diet for a day, right? Some of you haven't yet, but you could imagine it, right? Anyone can stick with it for a week. Some of you can even go for it for a month, but then it gets difficult. And that's when things really kick in. And that's where perseverance is needed. See, self-control is doing the same thing over and over and over again. Perseverance is doing the same thing over and over again, even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, even when everything inside of you says, this sucks, I don't like this, it's too hard, you keep going in the middle of it. It allows you to weather the storm to get on the other side. So now we have perseverance, and then we add godliness to our perseverance. Godliness is like the rudder to your ship. It actually determines if, in the middle of the storm, it moves you towards destruction or elevates you towards the life you were called to live. Have you ever seen two people go through the exact same type of situation? Maybe it was an abusive household, or maybe it was a really destructive, toxic relationship, and one person comes out like an addict and really struggling with life, and another person comes out on top of the world. See, same situation, but how they related to the storm transformed everything. And if you invite God into that process, it will elevate you. See, the question isn't whether or not you will go through the storm. The question is whether or not you will come out on the other side godlike or bitter. Those are usually the two options. And godliness will determine that. Now, last week we talked about adding now mutual affection to our godliness. Up until now, this whole journey has been all about you, and now it turns outward towards other people. That this is all for the purpose of increasing the potency of your faith, to actually live out the life that you were designed to live. But here's the thing, God has designed this world relationally, that you can't get away from that. And so now we take all of this faith that we've engaged in and we turn it outwards. And it starts with liking one another. I know that's a novel concept in our world today, that we actually start liking one another. And we define mutual affection as having care and attachment for one another, recognizing that when we connect to God, we become one with one another. But today we're going to talk about our very last supplement, our very last enhancement, and that is adding love to our mutual affection. And this seems like the most natural transition from moving from, hey, I like you, to I love you. And I want to read you this passage that I love in the scriptures from 1 John that talks all about love, and it defines it for us. It informs us what love is. So in 1 John 4, starting in verse 7, it says this. I want you to just follow along with me and love this. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God, and whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that God loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one's ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This is how we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us of his Spirit, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them, and they in God. And we also know and rely on the love that God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God. God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we'll have confidence in the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates his brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have not seen cannot love God, whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. See, I love this passage and how it defines love for us, because it says that we were made from love, but because of that, we were also made for love. And knowing that reality makes all the difference in the world, that God is love, so that it would make sense that you and I were actually made for love. And by the way, the transverse isn't true. God is love, but love isn't God. I know we oftentimes get stuck in that. It's one of the many ways we make God into our own image. And we make love a feeling and then say that has to be God, and we wonder why God can mean so many different things today. But here's the thing. If you don't know your purpose in life, you will find yourself just spinning your wheels. You will find yourself trying to find anything that, like Austin said, is going to fill that void, to fill that gap inside of you. You will find yourself spinning your wheels on anything that will get you close to fulfillment in life. I remember a couple years ago, I decided that what we needed in our house was chickens. Not in our house, in our backyard, actually. And so I went out. I'm like a city kid here in Pomona, and we went out and we bought a chicken coop, and we bought 4 chickens. And I'm out in the backyard putting this chicken coop together that I got from the Tractor Supply store in Norco, right? And so here I am putting this chicken coop together, and I'm out there with my, everything's going on, my saw and my drill and everything. And then it says, you need to take your hammer and tack on all the shingles that were on this chicken condo, as I called it. So I look around, my hammer's in the garage. Now, I'm like the guy who likes to get things done real fast in my time. So I'm like, I forgot my hammer. I don't have my hammer. So I look around for anything that's hard, right? That I can hammer nails with. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you're just busy and you're like, let me find a spoon or something. I look over and there's a rock, like a small rock. And so I'm like, this will work, right? I don't have to walk the 1 second over to the garage to get the hammer. So I'm out here like hammering these nails in with this rock. And about an hour, it felt like, into this, my fingers were now bloody, and I had probably put on about 3 shingles in the time it would have taken to do the whole thing. Had I just walked over and got the hammer, right? Because here I was using a tool that was not designed to put the shingles on the chicken coop. And I was bruised and bloody in the process. Things were not getting done. The chickens were not going to have their condo for that night. It was a bad situation, right? Because I was using this rock for a purpose that was not intended for. And so often in life, we find ourselves there. When we're not clear about our purpose, we will try to figure out anything that we can to fill that purpose in life. We will find it with career. We will find it with sex. We will find it with school. We will find it with relationships. We will find it with anything else to figure out what is going to move me towards this place. And once we get on that journey, we find ourselves in a lot of problems. Because not only are we then searching for what our purpose is, but then we're also searching for what is my identity in that. Because where you place your purpose will also define where you put your identity. And let me just tell you, we have a generation, meaning everyone alive today, that is in an identity crisis because we are in a love crisis. And I firmly believe that. See, I think we have a love/identity crisis because we cannot actually identify what love is. I think it's perfect that Austin started with his pizza and mom analogy around love, because we use that word so often. I mean, in any given day, I will say, I love Starbucks, I love my kids, I love my wife, I like a good cupcake, I like an idea, right? I love, whatever it may be. So the question is, how do we actually define love? Because if we're using this word so flippantly, it loses some of its power. So actually, how do I define what love is? And this is where part of the breakdown is. It's because we all have a different definition that we're operating on of what is love. And love has really become whatever I feel like it is. Whatever I feel in the moment has to be love. But if God is love, and we were made from God, it would make sense that we would look to him for what the definition of love is. And I love that this passage in John just clearly spells it out. Have you ever read the Bible and you're like, I have no idea what it's talking about? I love that John's just like, let me just lay it out for you, right? He says, God is love. And then he says, this is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son as a sacrifice for our brokenness. See, because here's the reality, is at the end of the day, love looks a lot like sacrifice. Love looks a lot like giving of yourself, sometimes until it hurts. It looks like giving up something that feels so important to you for the sake of another over there. And this whole journey of faith has been preparing us to get to the place where we can love, where we can actually step into a place where we can sacrifice for others. See, and I think this is why God can categorically say that he is love, because he sacrificed for us. That's what I love about the movement of Jesus, is that there's a lot of feelings in this movement. There's a lot of like, ooh, I got goosebumps and that felt tingly and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, you can actually point to a moment in history and say, oh, God sacrificed. You can actually look to a moment in history and say, God, out of his love for me, decided that he would send his son into the world and that he would sacrifice on my behalf and that he would die on a cross so that I could experience the fullness of life. That's not a question. That's not a feeling. That's like a moment I can point to and say, that person sacrificed for me. There's no question in the sacrifice, but there has to be sacrifice in order for love to take place. When Marla and I started dating, Marla's my wife, Marla was living on the other side of the world and we were dating through BlackBerry Messenger, which was very high tech at the time. And so we were having a great relationship. Things were going really well. And then she flew into Los Angeles and we met for the first time. Now, if you know anything about like the 5 love languages, Marla's like, I'm convinced after 8 years of marriage that Marla's only love language is physical touch. Get it? Now here's the problem. I don't think physical touch actually shows up in the 5 love languages for me. I'm more of like a quality time. Let's sit and talk. I'll buy you things. I will take you places. I will feel so intimately connected with you, and then we can have physical touch and then go back to whatever it is that we were doing before that. And so that's how I felt in the middle of that. And I remember about 8 months into dating Marla, she looked at me and she said, I don't know if you actually love me. And I was like, what in the... You ungrateful? Because you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to pull out my credit card bill and say, let me show you how I loved you. See this number here? That's how much I love you. See this credit statement? That's how much I love you. You want to see my calendar? No one gets this much time on my calendar. Jesus doesn't get this much time on my calendar. And I was like, I calmed down and put on my like transformational mindset. I was like, give me some feedback, honey. And she's like, well, like when we're watching TV, you sit on the other side of the sofa. And I'm like, that's because I'm 1,000 degrees. And I don't want another, but I'm like, tell me more, right? And she's like, when we go out, you don't like hold my hand and get up right next to me. And I'm like, that's right, because I like to move fast and you like to move slower, right? I'm given all these excuses. And here's the thing. I could have gone all day around why I loved her and why she wasn't getting it and why she needed to shift for me. But here's the thing. Until I sacrificed my preferences to meet her needs over there, it didn't matter. Until she got like, oh, Nathan loves me, that he's willing to put aside his preferences of how this relationship should be so that we can actually move forward, it did not matter. See, because love at the end of the day looks like sacrifice. And I love how Luke says this. In fact, so this is Jesus saying to us, he says this in Luke 6. He says, if you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? Even sinners love them, love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. See, last week I made this statement that it doesn't make sense when we say, I like you, I love you, but I don't like you. That doesn't make sense. That's like saying, I would marry you, but I would never go on a second date, How that statement doesn't make sense. And I remember when I first put this out, when we first did this series and the book first came out, I got so much slack because no, I can love someone but not like them, blah, 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 around that. And I finally was just like, look, let's just be honest. That in those moments when we're like, I love you, but I don't like you, we're just struggling to love. That's really what we're saying. We're like, I'm just struggling to put aside my preferences. I'm struggling to sacrifice for you. And the fact of the matter is we go back and forth instantly. I know we like to think of ourselves as like all light or all dark, right? We like to think of ourselves as constantly loving or just out of love. But the reality is that as human beings, we move back and forth. 1 minute I'm willing to sacrifice for you, and the next minute I'm selfish. 1 minute I'm willing to give you everything, and the next minute I'm like, you give me everything, right? We find ourselves so quickly going back and forth between those two things. And this is why you cannot say, I love God, but I don't love them. It's impossible. Fill in the blank. because loving God and loving others are the same. In fact, the evidence that you love God is actually how you love others, period. That is the first test, without any mental gymnastics. Not like, well, but maybe, just period. In fact, let me just rephrase the words of Jesus, if I could be so heretical for a moment. What if we just replaced love with sacrifice, and Jesus was actually saying, if you sacrifice for those who sacrifice for you, what credit is it to you? Even sinners sacrifice for those who sacrifice for them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. See, I actually want you to think about the person that you have the hardest time loving. Maybe it's a group of people. Maybe it's Christians. I want you to just think through who that is for you. It could be a person of a certain color. It could be a person of a specific sexual orientation. It could be a certain person of socio backgrounds. It could be a certain type of personality. It could be a belief that people have. It could be a certain religion that people have. It could be your mom, your dad, your uncle, your cousin, your wife, the person sitting next to you. Don't tell them if it is. But just think about the person that you struggle to love the most. The person that you're like, man, I would have such a hard time sacrificing everything for them. And what if the only love that God experienced from you was the love that you had for that person or those people? What if that was it? What if it wasn't the love that you have for the people that you love the most or that you find the easiest for? What if the only love that God experienced was from the love that you had for the people that you struggle to love the most? Because the scriptures say that loving those who are like you is absolutely no good. It is of no credit to you. See, I think it is actually astounding that God loves. That's crazy. That's like an insane idea. Because what that means is that God is exponentially more sacrificial than us. I mean, when you think about God, it's like God, right? Up there. But what this is actually telling us is that God is actively sacrificing for us on a regular basis. In fact, like the quintessential verse that even if you didn't go to church or you have no idea about who he is, John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that he sacrificed, that he was generous with who he is. See, when someone is generous with you, when someone is sacrificing for you, you know it. It's like an undeniable experience. I remember back in the early 2000s, I went over to a mentor's house of mine, and he had a little more money than me. And I walked into his house, and he said, I have to show you this new device. It's called a TiVo. And I was like, what is this TiVo that you speak of? And he says, you know how there's commercials on TV? You can fast forward through them. I was like, what witchcraft is this, right? And then he said, you can record television shows and watch them later if you want to. I was like, are you kidding me? And like the whole night, I was going on and on about the TiVo, right? I was like, the TiVo, that's amazing. So if I wanted to watch Friends at 9 o'clock at night instead of 7 o'clock at night, I could do that? Why, yes, you could. And you could fast forward through the commercials. I'm like, who invented this? Is the future. This is like what the Jetsons dreamed of, right? And I went on and on and on about the TiVo because I was just overwhelmed with the reality of this. And I remember at the end of the night, I got up to go out. I was like, hey, man, thanks for having me over. And he said, hold on just one second. He goes over to his TV and he unplugs the TiVo and he hands it to me. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, you are really into this TiVo? Like way more than a human probably should be. And he said, we'll go get another one tomorrow. Best Buy has them on sale. And so he's like, but I want you to have this one. And I'm like, what are you talking about, right? And he said, and there's like a 6-month subscription on that, so you can use all of it. And then after that, you're on your own, but 6 months. And I walked away so humbled. But you know what I knew in that moment? I knew that that person had my back. I knew that there was nothing that I would go through or nothing that I could bring to him that he wasn't going to generously provide for with me in the middle of that, because that was an undeniable experience of generosity. The same thing goes with God. That every time we come to him, he's like, here's the TiVo, right? Here's my son. Here's my love, period. No if, and, buts, asterisks, just that. See, the question then becomes, how do you actually serve a God who will always outserve you? How do you connect to a God who will always outlove you? How do you sacrifice for a God who will always out-sacrifice you? See, the only way that I know and that I see in the scriptures is actually to live a life of breathtaking faith, which is what this whole journey is about. It's about being willing to take this faith journey and to get to the point where you are now willing to sacrifice for others in a way that they would sacrifice for you. See, faith is intimately connected with the miraculous. It is intimately connected to that. See, because faith is the evidence of things unseen. It's the substance of things that we hope for in life. And your life becomes the evidence of things unseen. It becomes the substance of things hoped for when you start living a life that is defined by faith. Your life becomes evidence for the unseen. So when you stand in faith for healing from your depression or anxiety, there is a demonstration of the unexplainable. Even if it doesn't come to pass right then and there, there's something of saying, I'm believing, I'm standing for faith, I'm willing to sacrifice until we get there. When you find yourself in a space where you're like, I am believing for peace, I am believing for joy, I am believing for restoration, I am believing for a future that is worth having, every single time, it presences faith. It presences the miraculous. And let me tell you, the context for a miracle is always sacrifice. That's always the context that the miraculous takes place in. Every time in the scriptures. See, you can't have freedom without the plagues in Egypt to get free from Pharaoh. You can't be David and win the battle without having a Goliath first. You can't live a life and then presence life for the whole world without a crucifixion. There has to be a moment where sacrifice takes place to move us to the next place. And here's what I found in life is that everyone wants a miracle. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are an atheist this morning. I don't care if you are that little old lady who's been in church your entire life. Everyone wants a miracle. But not everyone wants the sacrifice. And there's a difference between the two. I know so many people who are like, I just want a better marriage. But I don't want to sacrifice for that. I want my finances fixed, right? But I don't want to change like my lifestyle with all of that. I want a deeper spirituality. I want to have peace. I want to have joy. But I'm really busy. I don't have really time to invest in that. See, if you are connected to Jesus, here's what I know, is he will call you into the miraculous, but he will always call you into sacrificial love. It's just a call into sacrifice for the world around you, to give your life away to others. And it's a constant. I wish it would stop, honestly, sometimes. There are times where I look at Marla and I'm like, haven't we given enough? Like, didn't we do that last month? I mean, like, we've given so much. I wish that was enough, but here's the thing. Is that with the constant call into sacrifice, with the constant call into giving your life away for the sake of others, it's also a constant invitation to step into the miraculous, to see your life be unexplainable, to see things in your life that you're like, I have no idea how that happened, or how that transformed in my own heart, or how I got released from that, but I know it had something to do with me giving my life away. See, if you are committed to living a miraculous life, then love will be the context, because love is sacrifice. But if you're anything like me, I'm addicted to fear. Anyone else with me on that? Like I almost like I apparently love being afraid, because that's just like my jam. I constantly find myself there. And what I love that John tells us is that fear is the enemy of love. It's the enemy of faith. It's the enemy of stepping into that type of sacrifice. Because here's the thing, that when you are called to sacrifice, to give your life away, to go have that conversation that you so don't want to have, to go change that habit that you're just like, gosh, I need to get help for this, to go have that new thing take place. When God's like, hey, it's time to sacrifice, the first thought that we have as human beings is, well, that means I'm going to be left with less. If I give my life away, then I'm going to be left without. If I give away that love, if I give away that type of hope, if I give away that type of faith, then I'm going to be left without. What happens if I sacrifice and I don't receive back? And we're often left with this idea that we're going to have a deficit. And so that's oftentimes what keeps us from fully loving. It's like that weird junior high space where you're like, can I say I love you? And then are you going to say you love me back? Or are you going to say thank you? You know? It's that weird space. Like if I say I love you, are you going to take that and destroy me? Or will I be elevated in that sacrifice with that? I might get hurt. I might get betrayed. I might get left down. Someone might see me. I might get depressed. I might be overlooked. But what I love that John tells us in this is that perfect love, perfect sacrifice will always cast out our fear. It will always remove that fear from us. That love, sacrifice creates this powerful context to risk in. I mean, this is how you transform every area of your life, I'm telling you. Yep. And this is why this whole journey has brought us to love. Because when you decide that you are going to sacrifice, it transforms everything. In order to have the marriage that you long for, it requires sacrifice. In order to have the life that you are called to, it requires sacrifice. In order to have the mental health that you are called for, it calls sacrifice. In order to have the finances that you long for, it requires sacrifice. Children, your bodies, it requires sacrifice. And let me tell you, my wife, the thing I love about Marla is that she just sacrifices for me constantly. And it creates such a foundation for our lives, for me to risk in. And I pray the same is true for her. That when love takes place, when there's mutual sacrifice taking place, it creates a powerful context to start loving in. And every relationship will break down when someone decides to stop sacrificing. When someone just decides, I can't sacrifice anymore, or I'm unwilling, it does not work. See, some of you have been praying for God to take away your fear and anxiety so that you can finally live a life of faith. Like, God, would you just take away the anxiety? Would you just take away the fear? If you take that away, I promise I will live a life of faith. But you know what he's saying today is he's saying, you know what? Actually, it's the opposite. Start sacrificing. Start giving your life away and your fear will be overpowered. Start loving. And I guarantee that anxiety, that hopelessness will be removed. At minimum, it will be diminished in your life. It may not be gone, but the voice will be silenced. Because now all that energy that goes into worrying about a future that might be, goes into creating a future that will be in your sacrifice. Because love is the antivenom to the soul poison of fear. Every single time. If you want to have a fearless faith, love. This is why when people come to Humanity Church and they're struggling with life, including us as leadership, I mean, we are included in this, is that we always say, look, we will do whatever it takes to walk with you to find freedom. And we mean that. We are not kidding. We will walk alongside of you and give you whatever is needed. And to find the resources needed for you to find freedom in your life. But here's where people get frustrated with us, is we say it always starts with sacrificing. It always starts with you giving your life away in some way, shape, or form. And here's the thing, it's not so that you can be a good Christian. I don't really care about that. I don't really care about being like the good one. It's because this isn't about like manipulating people into giving time or money or resources. I hate that with every ounce of my being. We say that you must start sacrificing because sacrificing is what gets your soul healthy. Giving your life away is what moves you towards soul health. Because your life then moves from a pond to a river. You're not just like stuck, stagnant, going, why is all this bacteria growing in my life? Because you're just pouring into yourself, sitting there, pooling, right? Your life becomes a river flowing out to others, and now there's space for the new. There's space for God to move in you. There's space for things to wash over you. There's space for things to be released in you. Your life moves from becoming a dammed up container to a river that flows out to the world around you, because rivers will always flow into others around you. And this is the journey. This is the process, and it is a journey. I think that's the important thing that we must remember, because there is very little arriving in this thing called the kingdom of God. There's not like and now I've made it to love, right? It's just a continual process of sacrificing and moving again and going again. There is much becoming on the journey. There is little arriving. See, if it was up to me, we just move to love. We'd just be like, let's love, right? Let's all love in the middle of this. But going through this process prepares you to become the type of person who can sacrifice, who is willing to sacrifice. It is living a life that is formed and informed by love. To walk with God through all of it. Through the hurt and the pain and the beauty and the joy and the overwhelm. To know a God that is so artistic, that would paint on your life something so beautiful, that you would walk away so breathtaking, not by who you are, but because of what he's done inside of you, to be faithful in that journey. But you know what's more powerful than just you doing that? It's way more powerful than when we do that as a community. And when we create a sacred space that is defined by love and that is known by our voice of hope in that. Never forget that you were made to presence the invisible, to be the evidence of things unseen. And it comes from our willingness to sacrifice, to create the future that we were made for. Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you that you are a God who out-sacrifices, you out-serve, you out-love, you outdo every single time. You leave us in shock and awe about who you are and what you do in our lives. And I ask, God, that you would remind us that we are called to be people of sacrificial love that transforms the world around us. God, may we be those who know who we are because we know what love is. We thank you that you sacrificed for us so that we could love. And this morning, if you're hearing this and you're like, I'm in for the love thing. It's hard. It feels overwhelming. It's difficult. I don't know how to do this. There's only one way to do this, and it is through a connection, a relationship with Jesus. This is not like, hey, how to be a good person 101. This is just how to release your soul over to a God that loves you and has sacrificed for you so that you could then be filled with that love and sacrifice for others. And if you're like, how do I connect to that God? It's super simple. It's just you saying, hey, I'm saying yes, I'm all in. I want that to be my defining characteristic is love. That I would sacrifice. And knowing that a God sacrificed for you so that you could fully live that out. And if that's you this morning, if you're like, hey, I want to connect to this God of love who has sacrificed for me so that I can live that way, this is your moment. I don't want you to leave this place not knowing how to connect to that. If you're online, this is for you as well. In fact, if you're here and you're like, I want to connect to Jesus maybe for the first time or for the first time in a long time, would you just look up at me so I know that's you? Awesome. So many people. If you're online, you can just type Jesus or click that button that says I'm making a decision to follow Jesus today. So many of you in this room, that's awesome. And let me just tell you, I'm going to lead you through a moment right now. And these aren't magic words. This is just prayer. Prayer is just you talking to God. And this is a moment where you're just going to ask the God who has sacrificed for you to come and to fill you with his love and to release your control. So if you want to pray this with me, you can just quietly in your heart. You can say, Dear Jesus, I give you my life. I know that I'm broken and in need of you. I thank you for your sacrifice for me, that you died and you came back to life so that I could live. And so I give you my life and I take yours on. I'm so grateful for who you are. And today I choose love. In Jesus'